So the last time we were diving deep into Pythagoreanism, we left off on the question of therapeia. So is this dichotomy between there are these universal forms, universal numbers that we can contemplate abstract principles of harmony, we can contemplate ratios and the perfections and unities and dualities and whatever. But then there was therapeia, which says that not only can you, it's almost like induction versus deduction. So deduction, let me get this right. Deduction is when you have a lot of different little facts, and from all these little facts you deduce some form of harmony. So you see, wow, there's all these perfect fifths, or wow, there's all these, like the golden ratio, you look at the spiral forms, you look at the Fibonacci, and you're like, whoa, look at the order in the universe, the Milky Way, you know. Get out there, you start blowing your mind with this theory, this deduction, and that's where we get the scientific term for theory. So in fact, you know, the scientific method really has roots in Pythagoreanism here. But we're talking about deduction, but then there's the opposite, which is induction. So you take some general theory, and then out of that theory, you draw some sort of conclusion. So you say, well, you know, I have some like theory of evolution, and I'm seeing here two fossils, and I know that there's this one fossil that looks like one thing, and then another fossil that looks a little different, and then we have like a living species, and there's this, it looks like there's an intermittent form, so I'm going to use the theory of evolution to induce that, you know, this middle form is like some kind of intermittent form or some intermediary or some transitory transition phase between one evolutionary form and another. So that would be induction. And the term here, the Greek term is therapeia, where you use some general theory of harmony. So you have like, okay, we need to use perfect fifths. So like when you're playing the piano, you start to learn chord theory. So you start to learn, okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. You start to learn the distance between different notes, and you can play bing, that's like a C major or whatever it is. I don't know. I don't have perfect pitch. But you can start to take a general theory and be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and you can do that, and then you can start fooling around the black notes and the white notes and all different notes. You can go up and you can say, okay, well, I can figure out what a C is, I can figure out what a D is, and then I can hum a harmony in my mind, like a mono chord or whatever the term, monotone harmony, just one note at a time, and then I can fill it out with chords to make it sound a little sassy, and then I can do the right hand, left hand, you know. So this is, I'm taking a general, like an abstract numerical principle, I'm applying it into numerical practice or musical practice, and then it actually sounds good, and it actually changes your psychic disposition. And depending on the music, if you're listening to this death metal, you get destructive, you get masculine, you get animalistic, you get angry, you get bestial. You know, you're working out at the gym with your black metal music, you're doing some thrashing, you know. So literally, it affects your psychic disposition, and that actually expresses itself in manners of dance. So when you're listening to black metal, you're just thrashing, you're thrashing around. You know, you're listening to jazz, that's going to produce a different psychic disposition. You're listening to hip-hop, you're listening to EDM, you're listening to rap, you're listening to all these different genres. Classical music is going to produce a different form of dance than other forms of music. There is a form of dance that actually corresponds to classical music, and it is distinct from other forms of music. So through aligning ourselves with different principles of theory, abstract numerical theory, actually computational theory at the end of the day, which we can intuitively perceive and hits us on some kind of intuitive level. So we hear a certain style of music and we instantly understand a style of dance that correlates with it without actually breaking it down quantitatively and understanding, okay, well, you know, this one uses a 3/4 beat. This is classical music is in 4/4. That's the distinction that produces some kind of different bodily disposition. Okay, this one is mostly minor chords. This one is mostly major chords. And you can break it down and actually define styles of music quantitatively. And we know that computers are now auto-generating music. It's not the best music, but electronic music people will use these randomly generated or computationally generated artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms to form a basis for different songs that they're making. So this is absolutely something that corresponds on some deep level just to numerology, to mathematics, but without understanding the mathematics consciously, it still affects us psychically. There's this missing link between we know that music is mathematical, we know it's not random, we know it's not arbitrary, we know it's not a mystical, magical thing in itself, until you boil it down to numbers, and then Pythagoras says, no, that's really when you get to the root digits of the thing, you break it down into its most basic formulas and components, that's when you hit the divinity of it. But music is composed of the mixtures of divine forms instantiated as numbers. So let's keep going with this. Through the use of proper diet, music, and exercise, the early Pythagoreans sought to nurture and maintain the natural harmony of the psychic and somatic faculties. So somatic here, if you're not familiar with the term somatica, that is just the body. So the psyche is your spirit, it's your brain, it's your psychology, it's everything that's not bodily. Whereas, and it's very similar to the German term Geist. So Geist is spirit, but it's also like the mind, the brain, the spirit of the times. Poltergeist in English. So ghost, Heilige Geist, Holy Spirit. All right, so psyche is like the Geist, the spirit, your ghost, give up the ghost, right? But then you have the somatic side, so the body. And you have diet, which is obviously somatic, it affects your body, but it also affects your mind, it affects your psyche. Exercise affects your body, definitely affects your mind. Music certainly affects your mind. You can quietly listen to music, but on some level, we have to understand it does affect the body. The music that you're listening to is going to affect your body. And it's interesting, people have brought up, I brought up before the four humors, different types of music are going to influence your humors. And hopefully we're going to get into the humors, because that's something that the Greeks were very interested in. Of course, it corresponds to the four elements in a way, earth, water, wind, fire. And it's still something that I think applies today. I think to me, it's the basis of things like Myers-Briggs and other things like that. They say, that you have in the business world, you have the four types being the analytic, someone who's sales-driven, someone who's a passive people pleaser, so a yes man, someone who's just oh yeah, I'll do whatever you want, and then someone who's no, you need to do what I want, and as a sales pitch of hey, this is why this is great for you, and then you have someone who's analytic, and then finally you have someone who's the boss, who's a director, someone who's not analytic, they're not into the details, they're not a people pleaser, and they're not really good at pitching sales, but they are really good at making goals, forcing goals, pushing people, getting on your ass. So, how would you break that down to the four humors? Obviously, the people pleaser is someone who's sanguine, someone who's just yeah, I'll do whatever you want. The person who's pushing sales, you might say, would be choleric. The person who is analytic, you would say, would be melancholic, and then the person who is driving the business would be phlegmatic. That I might have to switch that around, the phlegmatic and the choleric there. Maybe the phlegmatic doesn't really have a place in the business model, but you take those, and the INTJ is the hottest of the types. It's the spiciest of the Myers-Briggs, and the INTJ is you would say the analytic, the mastermind. How does that all fit into the four here? I'm sure someone's written a book about this. So where's the book? Why am I not reading that? But why am I reading about Pythagoras? Well, hopefully we're going to get some kind of taste into the history of this stuff. According to Iamblichus, they took solitary morning walks to places which happened to be appropriately quiet, to temples or groves or other suitable places. They thought it inadvisable to converse with anyone until they had gained inner serenity. Focusing their reasoning powers, they considered it turbulent to mingle in a crowd as soon as they rose from bed, and that is the reason why these Pythagoreans always selected the most sacred spots to walk. And we've got a footnote coming up on footnote 48. All of these practices can be seen as a form of philosophic purification, catharsis, a word we still use today, or praxis, designed to regulate the body and emotions on the intellectual and psychic levels. Through their study of mathematics in the natural world, the Pythagoreans approached the principles of harmony experientially. Through the study of harmonics on the monochord and through geometrical constructions, the Pythagoreans also pursued the study of purely abstract mathematics. Recalling that the end of all these pursuits was to follow God, it is interesting to briefly contrast the Pythagorean approach to divinization with the Christian mysticism of the late Hellenistic period and thereafter. The first stage of the mystical ascent consists of the ethical purification of the soul, commonly known as praxis. The second stage is contemplation, or theoria. In Christianity, however, the contemplation of nature, a universal principle so characteristic of the Greek philosophic tradition, is replaced predominantly by the contemplation of Scripture. The final stage, theosis, is the union of the mystic with God. In Hellenistic Christian mysticism of the late antique world, however, the first two stages lose virtually all significance when the final stage is reached. Catharsis and theoria are merely the steps of a ladder. When the summit is reached, the ladder is oftentimes kicked away. I feel like I've read this before, but I think we're getting to a new part, so we'll just continue. The ancient Pythagorean approach to divinization would have never sanctioned kicking away the ladder. In early Pythagorean thought, there nowhere appears an earnest desire to escape from the world, so it's not asceticism. True, like the Orpheus, the Pythagoreans believed in reincarnation and looked upon the body as limiting the soul. But even so, there is no firm evidence that, like the Orpheus, the Pythagoreans sought exemption from the wheel of generation rather than transcend the world. Pythagorean religiosity held as its goal to exist within the cosmos in a state of emotional repose and intellectual acuteness. So I'm getting some Nietzschean vibes here. You know, clearly Nietzsche is associated with a kind of Faustian striving, whereas this seems a little more cyclical, less Faustian, but still this concept of harmony with the world, being in the world, man, while possessing a soul which clearly transcends the limitation of the body, the realm of time and space, is nonetheless a reflection of the entire universe, a microcosm, and is linked together with nature, other living beings, and the gods through harmony, justice, and proportion. The Pythagorean goal was not to leave the divinely beautiful cosmos behind for a realm of transcendent harmony, but rather to become aware of and enhance the function of transcendent harmony in the natural, psychological, and social order. So we've got a big juicy footnote coming up. Within this context, it might be noted that Pythagorean metaphysics has, from ancient Greece to the present day, had an influence on the arts. The lesser can lead to the greater, and natural beauty, which is relative, can lead to the apprehension of transcendent beauty, which is absolute. This, of course, a Platonic sentiment, but is foreshadowed in the structure of Pythagorean thought. Perhaps, however, it would be more accurate in Pythagorean thought with its immanent metaphysics to suggest that the universal is realized through particular the use of mathematical and geometrical harmonies in sacred architecture, for example, can lead to the perception of and resonance with a universal harmony. For example, through the medium of Pythagorean geometry, a sacred edifice has the potential to become a celestial mediator. Through the harmonic nature of its structure, the heavenly principles of harmonic form are reflected on earth. Yet through the effect that this harmony has on those that are receptive to its beauty, the particular may be exalted to perceive the universal. This twofold principle is applicable not only in architecture, however, but indeed in all the arts. Whoa. All right, Pythagorean political and ethical theory. Here we are. The central insights of the Pythagoreans concerning the significance of harmonia were applied to political theory as well. In the same way that harmonic proportion underlies the health of the balanced soul, so too does the principle of justice underlie the living structure of a healthy state. In this regard, Plato's Republic, which is a study of justice in both the psychic and social realms, appears to be firmly based on earlier Pythagorean conceptions. Plato, via analogia, identifies the three parts of the soul with three different parts of society and shows how the soul and society attain their peak of excellence when each part receives its due and when each of the three parts fulfills the particular function for which it is best adapted. It is not possible to say whether Plato's tripartite division of society corresponds precisely with an earlier Pythagorean division, although it is known that the Pythagoreans identified justice with proportion, of which they viewed geometrical proportion as being the most perfect. Like Plato, the early Pythagoreans were aristocrats in the authentic sense of the word, believing that the best government will be composed of those best qualified to govern, as opposed to other political systems in which leadership is based on wealth, on power, or on the choice of the populace. Finally, it should be noted that the Pythagoreans were the first philosophical school to concern themselves with social and political questions, which fell outside the natural philosophy of the early Ionian tradition. As for the Pythagorean ethics, little needs to be said, as the entire idea of proper action is tied up with the ideas of philosophy as a way of life and the nature of the soul and the cosmos. As one discovers the nature and structure of the soul and experiences and begins to understand the principles of harmony, it seems inevitable that such insight will leave a mark on one's personal conduct and dealings with others. Nonetheless, as the writings in this volume demonstrate, the Pythagoreans did not hesitate to make use of aphorisms and other explicit ethical teachings. At all events, however, it will be seen that these teachings reflect and spring from the more universal insights of Pythagorean thought. In short, because each part is linked to the whole through harmonia, every action has its repercussions, either beneficial or not, for which the individual is supremely responsible. Whoa, okay, the Pythagorean tradition and its development. To survey the influence of Pythagorean thought would expand this introductory essay beyond reasonable boundaries insofar as the basic conceptions of Pythagoreans have influenced a long line of thinkers from antiquity reaching up until the present day. Nonetheless, something should be said about the thought of early Pythagoreans and Neo-Pythagoreans of the first centuries BC and CE, thus helping to place some of the writings here assembled into their proper context. As the biographical accounts in this volume show, the downfall of the original Pythagorean school had much to do with the anti-aristocratic sentiments among the populace of South Italy. A revolt was led against the Pythagoreans by Cylon in 500 BCE. Some say because he was rejected admission into the school, and a period of unrest followed. During the revolt led by Cylon, or during another revolt which followed, various meeting houses were attacked and a good number of Pythagoreans may have perished in the flames. Is there a nail under my foot? What is going on here? Why is this such a... What is actually happening? Is this glue? Is this a nail? I believe this is a nail. You know, I'm sorry, guys. It's just not, it's not cool. Some things aren't cool. Let's focus. Let's focus the psyche back into Pythagoras. Cylon, this guy Cylon, he was just attacking people. He was anti-aristocratic. He didn't like rule by excellence. He was a fan of mob rule. He was an early Bolshevik. Cylon the Bolshevik led a revolt, and there were other revolts, and they were killing people, and there was a whole burnt offering of Pythagoreans. This final attack seems to have been rather successful. Pythagoreans that remained alive seem to have migrated to mainland Greece, with the exception of Archytas at Tarentum. Unfortunately, the details concerning the attack in the school are sketchy details. Little more can be said than the above. The Pythagoreans did, however, carry on in mainland Greece, where centers were established at Phliaus and Thebes. Echecrates went to Phliaus. Xenophilus went to Athens, and the names of Lysis and Philolaus are associated with Thebes, and it was there that Philolaus taught Simmias and Cebes, who appear as characters in Plato's Phaedo. Philolaus, who was born around 474 BC, was the first Pythagorean to actually record the teachings of the school in writing. Hence, his fragments, which are collected in this volume, possess exceptional value. I feel like I've read all of this before. I'm feeling very stupid right now because I feel like I've read all of this before, and I'm rereading it, and those who have been following along have been cringing. It's cringe. One word to describe this whole channel right now is just cringe. Unfortunately, this is what happens when you don't make this a daily habit. Okay, so there is a general, I feel like we've read about Archytas before, the philosopher king. Guthrie is talking about Pythagoreanism. Separation of Pythagoreanism from Plato is a difficult task. There's a subjective bias. Plato and Pythagoreanism, can you really distinguish them? I don't know. Many important Pythagorean influences have already been noted on the thought of Plato, and perhaps it would be fair to view Plato as the most important Pythagorean thinker in the history of the West. There was quite a bit of interest in Pythagorean thought in the early academy, as well as been suggested that the idea of an academy was in part due to the inspiration of the earlier Pythagorean school. Whatever the case, some points of contact include the tripartite division of the soul. Let's see, the next one is 54. 54 is going to be a big fat footnote. Plato's usage of the one and the indefinite in the dyad, the theory of education in the Republic, the edification of the one and the good in the unwritten doctrine, referred to by Aristotle. How would you even say that in ancient Greek? Aristotle. I always wondered how the ancient Greeks said that. The Pythagorean character of Plato's lecture on the good, reported on by Aristotle, and that's a big footnote. See, Aristotle enjoyed telling the story on Plato's lecture on the good. Everyone went there with the idea that he would be put in the way of getting one or other of things in human life which are accounted good, riches, health, strength, generally an extraordinary gift of fortune. What he found that Plato discussed mathematics, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, finally declared the one to be good. No wonder they were altogether taken by surprise, in so as much as that in the end some of the audience were inclined to scoff, while others objected altogether. Yeah, I'm definitely getting some deja vu here. Let's see. The idea of the soul of the philosopher attains order by contemplating those things which possess order in nature. The idea that the goodness of anything is due to order and arrangement. The idea that various beings are linked together through geometrical equality. A doctrine of idea numbers in the Dogmata Agrapha, reported by Aristotle. Various examples of Pythagorean musical symbolism. Oh no. How do I even get to the right page? I thought the last video I made was the video in which what was the video? The video in which I had sound issues and sound problems. But clearly I read this stuff before. Following Plato in the leadership of the academy was his nephew Speusippus, who was quite interested in Pythagorean thought. He suggested that there exists a one above being, an important teaching of later Neo-Pythagorean and Neoplatonic thought. Also wrote a work on Pythagorean numbers about the tetractys and numbers comprising the decad. So we're on footnote 60. Next interesting one is 68. Treatise was based on Philolaus. Aristotle showed an interest in the Pythagorean school, even wrote an essay on the Pythagoreans. One student, Aristoxenos of Tarentum, was a music theorist in touch with the surviving generations of Pythagoreans. Aristoxenos, who might have been one of the mathematikoi, possessed an antiquarian interest in the school, wrote a biography of Pythagoras. After the time of Aristotle, we are left with an uncomfortable gap. It's very uncomfortable in the history of Pythagorean thought until the Neo-Pythagorean revival commencing in the 1st century BCE. It's precisely during this period that most of the Pythagorean ethical and political tractates contained in the second section were composed. By whom were they written? Unfortunately, no one's certain about the date or location of their composition. It exists a tendency to see these writings as being somewhat earlier than previously thought. It will be noted these writings are attributed to original members, but that's not the case. These are pseudo-epigrapha, attributing them to more well-renowned individuals out of reverence for their masters. Pythagoras attributed some poems to Orpheus. Jewish people did this as well. Hermetic writings, Pauline epistles, it's a practice. Okay. A careful study of the writings show they're deeply imbued with Pythagorean ideas. The structure of the family, the well-tuned lyre, similes, metaphors, the academic and peripatetic. What does peripatetic mean? I've heard that word before. Peri means almost. Pathetic. I know pathos is like emotion. Peripatetic. Okay. That's weird. I didn't mean to do that. I just meant to search peripatetic. For those of you who didn't know what peripatetic is, let's shout it. Peripatetic, traveling from place to place, in particular working or based in various places for relatively short periods. Nomadic, itinerant, traveling, wandering, migratory, vagabond, vagrant. So we don't have a migrant crisis, we have a peripatetic crisis. Cool. Thesauruses. Thesleff is probably correct in suggesting these writings were composed as philosophical textbooks for laymen. It is unlikely that the exact date or locale of their composition will ever be settled. The next phase involves the Neo-Pythagorean revival due to the Hellenization of the ancient world stemming from the conquest of Alexander the Great. Interesting, Greek philosophy was no longer limited to one part of the world. This was especially true of Pythagorean and Platonic thought. And unfortunately, for some of the most important thinkers, the information is fragmentary. No one has attempted a full-scale study that it deserves. The study is significant. The understanding of Plotinus and other Neoplatonists influenced by Neo-Pythagoreans. John Dillon has observed this period of Middle Platonism and Neo-Pythagoreanism existed as a continuum. And Neo-Pythagoreanism was an attitude within Platonism. Keeping this in mind, it might be useful to mention some of these thinkers. The first word that we have concerning a renewed interest in Pythagorean thought comes from Cicero and his friend Nigidius Figulus, who is attempting to revive Neo-Pythagoreanism in Rome. It appears, however, that Nigidius was less interested in abstract philosophy than in integrating astrological ritual and a variety of occultist beliefs. Eudorus of Alexandria appears to have been influenced by Pythagorean thought and attempted to show that Pythagoreans held that a supreme principle existed above the monad and the dyad. So that would be a triad, right? That would be a trinity. This is like 30 years before Christ, keep in mind. Keep in mind when you're thinking about the Trinity. Whether or not the earlier Pythagoreans actually held such a belief is another question altogether, but the notion of a transcendent one surpassing the principles of limited and unlimited is important. Philo of Alexandria, a Hellenized Jew who interpreted Jewish scripture in light of Greek philosophy. So again, the Jewish tradition is the Greek tradition. Why do you think they call it the synagogue? Because they've been Hellenized. They've been Hellenized. Judaism owes its history, the development of its religion to Greek philosophy. There's a deep interest in Pythagorean thought, especially arithmology. Primo was a Platonist who subscribed to what does that word mean? Emanationist cosmology, which tried to reconcile Jewish thought with Platonism. It was interesting to note that he was referred to by Clement of Alexandria, an early church father, as Philo the Pythagorean. We should not fail to mention Apollonius of Tyana, a colorful figure who flourished during the first half of the first century. Apollonius was perhaps more of a Pythagorean wonder-working ascetic than a philosopher who traveled through the ancient world. We've definitely read this part. How much are we going to read a second time? I mean, this is like a whole... I did an entire video. I'm just redoing the video. Is this better or worse than the time I muted my microphone for like 90 minutes? Is this better or worse? I can't tell. I can't tell. It's a hard question because on the one hand, we're being very repetitive. On the other hand, we're really deeply ingraining these factoids in the mind. So that could be a positive. Versus the other case, it would be we wasted our time talking about stuff, but maybe, I don't know, maybe it doesn't really matter so much. Let's just get back into it. Cults of worship, performing marvels, life and exploits. There was an entertaining novel written about him by Philostratus. Is this a well-rounded picture? I don't know. It does seem that Apollonius saw himself as a reincarnation of Pythagoras and possessed much information on the life of the sage, which he used in compiling a biography. In addition to this, we've got some stuff. Okay, overlooked as important witnesses is Plutarch of Chaeronea, well known for his famous lives. What is not so generally well known is that Plutarch was a Platonist with Neo-Pythagorean leanings and was a priest of Apollo at Delphi. In certain writings of his Moralia, he displays a keen interest in the interpretation of myth, the religio-philosophical esotericism of the time, and various bits of Neo-Pythagorean lore, including arithmology. His writings remain... I'm going to move this up so I don't have to look down. So, okay. We're getting into new territory. I'm hoping that we're getting into new territory. We're on page 44. Oh boy. No, we've definitely read this before. We're just reading things twice. That's always fun. All right, his writings remain a vital resource for understanding profound inner dimensions of the contemporary spiritual universe. He refers to the Pythagorean interpretation of the name Apollo, which equates Apollo with the one, A meaning not, Apollon of many. Okay, I remember reading that because I was like, whoa, Apollo. It's such a weird name. I never knew where it came. I know Zeus is Zeus, literally like the god, Zeus, and I don't know, Athena. Athena is not Thena. So what is Thena? What is Thena? Yeah, what is actually Thena, though? Is there a word, Thena? I want to know what Thena is. No, I don't want to go to Marvel Comics. Tell me what is Thena? I know, like, thematic. It's like a theme. Like the theater. What's Thena? If I just look up Thena, what happens? Accusative. Oh, this is an Old Saxon. I don't want Old Saxon. We're doing some etymology. Oh, I got some eyelashes in the eye. Okay, borrowed from Latin Athena, from ancient Greek Athena. Yeah, but what if I click on the Greek? What happens then? Oh, it just says Athena. There's nothing deep here. It doesn't go back. Ooh, Laconian. This is interesting. Laconian, which is the language of the Spartans, by the way. This is interesting. So, in Attic, it's Athenaia. In Ionic, it is Athenaia. In Ionic, it is Athene. In Doric, it's Athana. And in Laconian, or Spartan language, it is Asana. Asana. That's cool. Etymology. See this. What's the etymology? Uncertain, possibly a lost pre-Greek language. Wow, so cool. You know, it says, click on this to learn the etymology. It says uncertain, possibly from a language we don't know. Possibly. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Wiktionary. You're so elucidating. All right, about the same time as Plutarch, we have Moderatus of Goddess, who has been termed an aggressive Pythagorean for the severe criticism he applied to Plato, accusing him of using ideas of Pythagoras, which we've read before, without giving proper credit where credit was due. In his cosmology, Moderatus taught the existence of three unities, the first and the highest, the one above being which he identified with the good. Secondly, a unified active logos identified with the intelligible realm. And thirdly, the realm of the soul. Needless to say, the resemblance between these ideas and those of Plotinus are quite striking. Theon of Smyrna brings us into the 2nd century. He was a Platonist who wrote a work, Mathematics Useful for Understanding Plato, of which a good English translation still exists, which is equally useful for understanding aspects of Pythagorean thought. In addition to discussing the principles of arithmetic, harmonics, and astronomy, Theon also treats the symbolism of the first 10 integers, various forms of the tetractys. The work also dealt with the principles of geometry, but this section no longer survives. Working in a similar vein, we have Nicomachus of Gerasa, and this was translated into Latin by Boethius. We know about Boethius, which remained a handbook up until the Renaissance. We have the Manual of Harmonics. Ooh, the practice of gematria. See, I remember. I did a video on this. I don't even remember. How can I expect people to... Why I don't. I can't even be held to the standard of remembering my own videos. And, like, can you imagine that? Can you imagine waking up one morning, reading a book, putting it up on YouTube, and then the next day you get up and you start reading the book again, and you're reading the same chapter, and you're doing it over and over again. It's Sisyphean. It's like Sisyphus over here. All right, so we got to footnote 68. Each letter of the Greek alphabet, yeah, we know what it represents. So we talked about gematria. We talked about the Gnostic divinity Abraxas. And we talked about Sargon II and Khorsabad and Gematria. We talked about all this. How did I miss this? What happened? I just missed my own video. How does this happen? Who's watching? I'm not watching. We're going downhill here. All the metrics, we're on the downslide. I don't know what's going on. This is going to have to end at some point. What's a good stopping place? Where can we stop so we can get back to reading this a second time? We're on page 44, A Philosophy of Whole Systems. I feel like we got to a philosophy of whole systems last time. Well, this was a big fail. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time. I don't know. It's raining, so I feel like this is a good place to stop. Yeah, okay, whatever.